Hash the boy who dug through mountains. Hash hash a motivational story. Stop scrolling. I know you have 1,000 things to do. I know your feed is full of people getting rich overnight, of geniuses being discovered, of luck striking like lightning. But I'm not here to tell you a story about luck. I'm here to tell you a story about something far more rare. It's a story about a boy who decided to dig through a mountain. Not with machines, not with dynamite, not with a team of engineers, but with his bare hands and a simple pickaxe. For 10 years he dug. For 10 years people laughed at him. For 10 years he had nothing to show but bleeding hands and a pile of rocks. And then everything changed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what he found, before I tell you why he kept digging when everyone told him to stop, I need you to ask yourself a question. What mountain are you trying to dig through right now? Maybe it's a business that won't take off. Maybe it's a skill you can't master. Maybe it's a dream that feels impossible. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because this story might just change the way you see your mountain forever. In a small village nestled in the shadow of a great mountain range, there lived a boy named Arjun. The village was poor, the soil was rocky, and the people survived by farming small patches of land that yielded just enough to keep them alive. From his earliest memories, Arjun could see the mountains from his window, massive, ancient, unchanging. They had been there for millions of years, and they would be there for millions more. Arjun's father was a stonecutter. Every morning he would walk to the quarry at the base of the mountain, and every evening he would return with dust in his lungs and exhaustion in his bones. He earned just enough to feed his family, nothing more, nothing less. On his deathbed, when Arjun was only 12 years old, his father took his hand and said something the boy would never forget. "Arjun," he whispered, his voice as rough as the stones he'd spent his life breaking, "I spent 40 years cutting pieces from this mountain. Small pieces, never enough. Do you know what I learned?" Arjun shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "The mountain doesn't give anything to those who only take small pieces. You have to dig deep. Deeper than anyone else is willing to dig." But I was too afraid. I had a family to feed. I couldn't take the risk. "Don't be like me, son. Dig deep. Dig until you find what you're looking for." Those were his father's last words. The next morning, Arjun picked up his father's pickaxe. It was old, worn, heavier than he expected. He walked to the quarry where his father had worked for 40 years. The other stonecutters saw him coming and shook their heads. "Go home, boy," one of them said. "This is men's work." But Arjun didn't go home. He found the spot where his father had left off a small indentation in the mountain wall, and he struck it with a pickaxe. A tiny chip of rock fell to the ground, and so it began. Day after day, Arjun returned to that same spot. Week after week, month after month. The other stonecutters watched him, at first amused by the sight of a boy trying to do a man's job. But as the months turned into years, their amusement turned to concern, then to pity, then to mockery. "What are you looking for, boy?" they would shout. "Gold, diamonds? There's nothing in that mountain but rock." "There's something," Arjun would reply, striking the wall again. "My father said to dig deep. I'm digging deep." By the time Arjun was 15, he had dug a hole 5 feet deep into the mountain. By the time he was 18, it was 15 feet deep. He worked alone, in darkness, while the other stonecutters took their easy stones from the surface and went home to their families. Arjun had no family now. His mother had passed 2 years after his father, worn down by grief and poverty. He lived alone in his parents' small hut. He ate the simplest food. He owned nothing but his father's pickaxe and the clothes on his back. And every day he dug. The villagers tried to intervene. The village elder came to him when Arjun was 20 years old, finding him emerging from his hole, covered in dust, his hands calloused and bleeding. "Arjun," the elder said gently, "it's been 8 years. 8 years of your life, and what do you have? A hole in a mountain. The other young men your age have wives, children, land. They're building lives. You're destroying yours. Stop this madness. Come back to the village. We'll find you work." Arjun looked at the elder with eyes that had grown used to darkness. With respect, sir, he said, I'm not destroying my life. I'm building it. My father spent 40 years taking small pieces from the surface. He died with nothing. I'm digging deep. I don't know what I'll find, but I'll find something. The elder shook his head and walked away. He told the villagers that the boy was lost, touched by grief, unable to see reason. They stopped inviting him to village gatherings. They stopped trying to help him. Arjun became a ghost, someone they saw walking through the village but never really saw, someone they talked about but never talked to. And still, he dug. The loneliness was the hardest part. There were days when Arjun would sit at the mouth of his hole, looking out at the village below, watching the lights come on in the evening, hearing the distant sounds of laughter and music. He would wonder if they were right. Was he wasting his life? Was there really nothing in this mountain but rock? On one such evening, when he was 22 years old and 14 years into his digging, he almost gave up. He had struck rock for 14 years of the same motion, the same sound, the same dust. His hands were permanently scarred. His back ached constantly. He had nothing to show for it but a hole that was now 40 feet deep and a pile of rubble outside it. He stood at the edge of the hole, looking down into its darkness. He thought about his father's last words. Dig deep, deeper than anyone else is willing to dig. Was this deep enough? Had he proven something? Could he finally stop? He picked up a small rock from the rubble pile. It was just like every other rock he'd pulled from the mountain, gray, ordinary, worthless. He held it in his hand and felt its weight. 14 years of his life reduced to this, a pile of rocks. That night, Arjun didn't sleep. He sat at the mouth of his hole, watching the stars wheel overhead, and he wrestled with the biggest question of his life. When do you know when to quit? He thought about all the people who had told him to stop. He thought about the elder, the stonecutters, the villagers. He thought about his parents, both gone, both having lived and died without ever knowing what was inside this mountain. And then he thought about his father's voice, weak and raspy on his deathbed. Don't be like me, son. Arjun stood up as the sun began to rise. He looked at his whole 40 feet of darkness and rock. Then he looked at the mountain rising above him, miles and miles of stone, stretching up into the clouds. I don't know what's in there, he said aloud. But I know one thing. If I stop now, I'll never know. And I'd rather die digging than live wondering. He picked up his pickaxe and climbed back into the hole. Year 15. Year 16, year 17, the hole grew deeper, 50 feet, 60 feet, 70 feet. Arjun had long ago lost count of the days, the weeks, the months. Time had become meaningless. There was only the rhythm of the pickaxe, the fall of rock, the endless repetition. His body had changed. He was no longer the thin boy who had started digging. His arms were thick with muscle. His shoulders were broad. His hands, though scarred, were powerful. He had become a machine, perfectly adapted to his single purpose. But something else had changed too. The rock was different now. Deeper in the mountain, it was harder, denser. It resisted his pickaxe in ways the surface rock never had. He had to strike harder, work longer, rest less. Progress slowed from feet per day to inches per day. The villagers, who had long ago stopped paying attention to him, began to notice something strange. The pile of rubble outside Arjun's hole was now enormous, a small mountain of its own, and the rock in that pile was different from any they had seen before. It was darker, heavier, with strange veins running through it. A merchant passing through the village saw the pile and stopped. He picked up a piece, examined it, and his eyes widened. Where did this come from? He asked the nearest villager. The villager pointed toward Arjun's hole. From that madman, the one who's been digging for almost 20 years. The merchant walked to the hole. He stood at its edge and looked down. Far below, in the darkness, he could hear the rhythmic sound of a pickaxe striking rock. Halud, he called. The sound stopped. After a long moment, a figure emerged from the darkness, a man with wild hair and piercing eyes, covered in dust, holding a pickaxe. Yes, Arjun said. The merchant held up the rock. This, where did you find it? Arjun looked at the rock, then at the merchant. 70 feet down. Maybe more. I don't keep track anymore. Do you know what this is? The merchant asked, his voice trembling with excitement. Arjun shook his head. This, the merchant said, is iron ore, high-grade iron ore. There's a fortune in this mountain. A fortune. Arjun stared at him for a long moment. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He smiled. News spread quickly. Within weeks, geologists arrived from the city. They surveyed the mountain, took samples, ran tests. Their conclusion was unanimous. The mountain contained one of the richest iron deposits in the country. And at the center of it all, where the ore was purest and most valuable, was Arjun's hole. Companies came with offers. They wanted to buy the rights to the mountain. They offered Arjun sums of money that would have seemed like fantasy just months earlier, enough to buy the entire village, enough to live comfortably for the rest of his life. But Arjun refused them all. I didn't dig for 20 years to sell to the first person who shows up, he told them. I'll mine it myself. They laughed at him. A single man mining an entire mountain? Impossible. But they didn't know Arjun. They didn't know what 20 years of digging had taught him. Arjun used the money from his first small shipments of ore to buy equipment. Not the massive machines the companies wanted to bring in, just better tools, better lighting, better support for his tunnel. He hired a few workers, then a few more. He taught them what he had learned: how to read the rock, how to find the richest veins, how to dig deep when everyone else wanted to stay on the surface. Within 5 years, Arjun's mining operation was the largest in the region. Within 10 years, he was one of the wealthiest men in the country. He built schools in the village that had once mocked him. He built hospitals. He built roads. The villagers who had called him mad now called him sir, and their children learned his story in the schools he built. But Arjun never forgot the lesson of the mountain. One day, a young man came to see him. He was perhaps 20 years old, with the same look in his eyes that Arjun had once had: desperate, determined, searching. Sir, the young man said, I've been trying to start a business for 3 years. Everyone tells me to give up. My family says I'm wasting my time. My friends have moved on with their lives. I have nothing to show for my work but debt and disappointment. How do I know if I should keep going? Arjun looked at the young man for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small rock, gray, ordinary, worthless looking. Do you see this? Arjun asked. The young man nodded. This was the first rock I ever pulled from the mountain, Arjun said. I've kept it all these years. Do you know why? The young man shook his head. Because it reminds me that you can't judge a journey by what you find at the beginning. When I pulled this rock out, it looked exactly like every other rock on that mountain. If I had judged my progress by that rock, I would have quit on day one. But I kept digging, and eventually, the rocks started to change. First a little, then a lot, until finally, I found what I was looking for. He handed the rock to the young man. Your business right now is this rock, Arjun continued. It looks like failure. It looks like a mistake, but you don't know yet what it really is. You won't know until you dig deeper. Maybe you're 5 feet from iron. Maybe you're 50 feet from iron. Maybe you're 1,000 feet from iron. The only way to find out is to keep digging. The young man looked at the rock in his hand. But what if I dig my whole life and find nothing? Arjun smiled. Then you'll die knowing you gave everything to find out. That's a better death than living with the question. My father died wondering what was in this mountain. I'd rather die inside it, still digging, than die outside it, still wondering. The young man left that day with a rock in his pocket. Years later, Arjun heard that he had built a successful company not because the rock had brought him luck, but because he had kept digging when everyone told him to stop. Today, if you visit that village, you'll see something remarkable. At the base of the mountain, preserved as a monument, is Arjun's original tunnel. It's 70 feet deep, narrow, dark, unremarkable. A plaque at its entrance tells the story. Arjun dug this tunnel with his bare hands over 20 years. Everyone called him mad. Everyone told him to stop. But he believed that deep inside this mountain, there was something worth finding. He was right. Let this tunnel remind you that the greatest treasures are often buried deepest, and that those who dig longest dig deepest. Asterisk. Beside the tunnel, there's a small museum. Inside, under glass, is Arjun's pickaxe worn down to almost nothing after 20 years of use. And next to it, in a separate case, is the first rock he ever pulled from the mountain. The plaque beneath it reads, Asterisk. This rock looks like nothing. It is nothing. But without it, there would be nothing else. Every great discovery begins with something that looks like nothing. Every great journey begins with a step that leads nowhere. The only difference between those who find treasure and those who don't is this: they kept walking, they kept digging, they kept believing that the next strike might be the one that changes everything. Asterisk. Arjun lived to be an old man. On his deathbed, surrounded by family and friends, he was asked if he had any regrets. He smiled and shook his head. My only regret, he said, would have been stopping. Everything else, the loneliness, the pain, the doubt, it was all worth it. Because I found out what was inside the mountain. And more importantly, I found out what was inside me. Asterisk. Conclusion. Appeal to viewer. Asterisk. So now I ask you again, what mountain are you digging through right now? Maybe you've been at it for months, maybe years, maybe decades. Maybe everyone around you has told you to stop. Maybe you're starting to wonder if they're right. Here's the truth. I don't know what's inside your mountain. Neither do you. That's the point. The only way to find out is to keep digging. The rock you're holding right now, the failed business, the unfinished book, the rejected application, the struggling relationship, it looks like nothing. But you don't know that yet. You won't know until you dig deeper. One more strike, one more day, one more attempt. That's all it takes. Just one more than everyone else is willing to make. Arjun struck rock for 20 years before he found iron. 20 years of nothing. 20 years of doubt. 20 years of being called crazy. And then, one day, everything changed. Your day is coming. It might be tomorrow. It might be next month. It might be 20 years from now. But it will never come if you stop digging today. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that persistence matters more than talent, that time spent digging is never wasted, then do one thing for me: share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's struggling, someone who's thinking about giving up, someone who's holding a rock that looks like nothing, not realizing that just a few feet deeper, there might be gold. Like this video to tell the algorithm that stories like this matter. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories that remind you why you started digging in the first place. And most importantly, keep digging. Your mountain is waiting, and what's inside it is worth everything you've given so far, and everything you still have to give. I'll see you on the other side.